So obviously there has been, I'll just go ahead and say, a lot of confusion when it comes to around what does werewolf do good now. But at the very least, we could put a feather in this part of the argument, which is that Fire Claws feels pretty amazing. Now, it definitely gets on the higher end of expensive, at least for the end game version of the build. And on top of that, there's just so many different ways to build out this character that has certain strengths and certain weaknesses depending on where you're going to farm. What I want to highlight is something I think is a very versatile version of Fire Claws that's going to give you good survivability, good variety in areas that you can farm with it, as well as not necessarily super breaking the bank. Although the shield, I mean, the shield's just expensive. There's no way that I can get around it for you. But let's go ahead and take a look at the build, and I'll give you some ideas of where really good places to farm and why I pick the gear that I do. For the build itself, we're going 1 point everything that is a requirement to get up to Fire Claws, and then we're shift-clicking Fire Claw. You'll see right now we have a level 41 Fire Claw that's giving us 650 attack rating, which is more important for boss groups and less important for the base monsters since we are using ignore target defense on the weapon. But we're sitting on a pretty 13,000 to 14,000 fire damage on single target Fireclaw. The rest of our points are going into the elemental tree. So the AoE on this build is coming mostly from Armageddon. So we're going to shift click into Armageddon. Obviously we're shift clicking into Firestorm and Molten Boulder, as those are the synergies for Fireclaw. And then you have some options here. I like to dump my points into Fissure because Armageddon gains duration according to your skill points in Fissure. And with the amount of points that we have in it right now, we're only getting a 30-second Armageddon, so you do have to recast this pretty often. But if you don't put any points into Fissure, it only lasts for 12 seconds. You can definitely drop the points into Volcano so that you have more damage on your Armageddon itself. But realistically, I like the quality of life of having a longer duration Armageddon, so I don't feel like I'm recasting it too often, because we do have a second buff that we need to keep up, and that's the Feral Rage. So Feral Rage is going to give us our run walk speed. If you're not using Enigma, obviously you're going to need this run walk speed to get to the farming area of your choice. And then on top of that, it's also giving you a massive amount of life steals, so that when you take a look at our gear, you'll understand how we're actually surviving on a build that's doing predominantly elemental damage. We are using a Grief Phase Blade here, really good attack speed, so we're getting up to a decent breakpoint as far as frames per attack is concerned. And then most notably, it's carrying that flat damage, which is going to get enhanced both by our skill as well as by our shield, and that's going to be our major source of survivability when we're leeching off of targets. And then on top of that, it also has ignore target defense, which is so important. Make sure that you're connecting with as many base minions and mobs as possible, since ultimately this version of the Fireclaw Druid is a pretty decent elite sniper that also has good AoE clear on anywhere between players 1 to players 5. And even on players 8, you are two-shotting most monsters once Conviction Aura shows up, but realistically, you're not trying to do P8 density clear on this. For the helmet, we are using a Flickering Flame. This is probably best in slot on the build by a far margin. You want to put this into a Druid helm that's going to give you additional plus skills to either Fireclaw, Feral Rage, or any of your other abilities like Armageddon. High Lords for the increased attack speed, as well as plus to skill. As many plus to skills as you can get onto the build as possible is really nice, because again, you're going to be buffing Armageddon and Fireclaw's damage by a huge percentile whenever you do that. And then for the physical damage component that we have, obviously Deadly Strike, right? We're using Wartravs. The boots kind of don't matter on this build, so this is one of the best areas to stack Magic Find as it stands right now. Ravenfrost for Cannot Be Frozen, and then any +1 skill ring. Arachnid Mesh, in addition to the Mage Fist, which is going to increase both Armageddon and Fireclaw, the 40 faster cast rate here is really important, so that if you are using Teleport on something like Enigma, you can get to areas faster, and then once you're into Werewolf form, that faster run walk on Enigma, as well as the Magic Find, is going to make your clear speed a lot faster, and actually stack a decent amount of Magic Find on the core build. On swap, Call to Arms with the Spirit, pretty par for the course there, and then across the bottom, Shapeshifting Skillers. We want as much plus the skills as possible, and buffing out Fireclaw is a lot more important than the Armageddon, since Armageddon is more so something that will help to clear on lower player settings and help to butter up monsters when you're farming on higher player settings. Mercenary is obviously going to be using Infinity. We want as much minus enemy fire res as possible, and then just Fortitude and Andariel's Visage for survivability. This could be a Treachery, or a Lionheart, or Smoke, or a Talrash's Helmet, Rock Stopper, anything that's going to give them survivability. Honestly, the only thing that really matters is the infinity. Now, as far as other options for this exact same mercenary, you can be using an Act 5 mercenary with dual plague. That's going to give you a really high chance of having lower res on any targets that you're fighting in a very wide area. And that's definitely going to be the more budget option until you can get into something like an infinity. Now, even without CTA up, our Fire Claw is doing about 15k damage, and then on top of that, our Armageddon is doing around 6 or 7k damage in an area around us. Remember that they increase the radius and the rate at which projectiles fall from Armageddon, so it feels a lot better in patch 2.4. Now, really important thing that Teo just pointed out, why werewolf over werebear? In this newest version of patch 2.4, the werewolf's on skill increased attack speed is so much more important, since you can't just abuse a bunch of increased attack speed on weapon. While that is going to help, the flat skill increased attack speed feels so much better, and the werebear just doesn't attack fast enough. So even though you're getting more damage and not being able to be interrupted, you're probably attacking at about half the speed as you would on the werewolf with this set of gear. Now, a couple things. Where do you farm on this? We took this into the Icy Cellar, so that's just outside of Ancient's Way. It's a really great place to go to. Nowadays, it's spawning with like upwards of 5 or 6 elite packs in it, and then you get the gold chest at the end. Obviously, farming cows on any player settings is going to be fairly decent. You have a pretty slow clear speed on players 8, but I wouldn't call it the slowest compared to just about anything else that you could run around with that is an actual melee build. And on lower player settings, you would absolutely trounce through here pretty quickly. On top of that, Stony Tombs is a new area level 85 that has no fire immunes at all and has an amazing amount of density, anywhere between 4 to 5 elite groups per level, with the absolute 2 groups on level 2 in Creeping Feature and in the chest room, and then you get the golden chest as well. And since you run around very quickly, there are a ton of clickables in there, and just popping those at higher player settings are a really good way of getting yourself into high runes early on in the season, since everything in there pops almost instantly. Being able to take this down into the pits as well, especially on lower gear, you're able to absolutely trounce through anything like the pits. This works really well in anywhere that has high density, weak monsters that are constricted to a space, so that you're getting the maximum quality of life out of Armageddon, and you're able to run there very quickly, considering that even with level 1 Feral Rage, once you're at max stacks, you're sitting on 84 Life Leech and 54 faster Run Walk. So take that with really good base boots like Alders, and you don't even really need the Enigma. You're going to be cruising through any low-level areas at pretty top mock speed. How does the build feel? Quite honestly, when I first put the gear together, we were considering things like Hands of Justice, trying to put even more, like a 4-faceted Monarch onto the build. And I think realistically, something like a Phoenix ends up being the best option. One, you get Firestorm on striking, so you're getting a little bit more AoE. On top of that, the Redemption Aura helps to keep you alive if you're ever attacking something that's undead that you can't leech from. The enhanced damage on it, including the Grief, gives you a pretty decent package of physical damage for survivability. And then that minus 28 enemy physical or fire res is just, it's what you need. You need to stack as much minus enemy fire res. And then on P8, you're going to see it in the gameplay. We're two-shotting stuff in an area level 85. Even things that were immune to physical, so our grief damage is completely out of the door, we're two-shotting stuff. It's like pretty amazing what the total damage output looks like, even without perfect gear. Because I would say that the gear that we're rocking right now, while definitely fulfilling all the item roles, are literally not even perfect. We're missing +3 skills from this. There are a lot of different options for the amulet. You could put a lot of different types of survivability down here. I do think that skillers are the best option, but you could also bump up your physical damage more if you wanted to farm places that had a higher range of either fire resistance or fire immunes, if you want to be even more versatile in where you can farm. But yeah, the build feels really good. Survivability is great. Your base health pool is pretty nice. You are going to get knocked around, especially if you get amped, so I do recommend either going back and clearing that or running that dual plague so you have a level 34 cleansing aura. Every single curse will be gone in a matter of seconds if you're rocking that high level of a cleansing aura. This is my first time building out a Fireclaw's Druid, and I'm already pretty impressed with the output and versatility, but let me know if you think that there are better gear options or different ways of building this out. There's a lot of play as far as what do you max out in the elemental tree, and whether or not you actually end up going down into having 1-point Fury on something like Grief, so that if you run into pure fire immunes, you have a better max damage output skill instead of just relying on something like Feral Rage. So let me know down in the comments if you think that there are either different ways or better optimizations. And I'm really excited to see what we all do in general to try to max out these new options. You know, obviously you could always do Fireclaw, but with the changes in patch 2.4, a lot of things just feel so much better to pilot. And I'm really excited to see what like the total min-max perfect version of this build is. But thank you so much for watching.